we shall be discussing about the fourth stage of transport planning, which is popularly known as modal split. Now, before we start the discussion on modal split, you need to understand about what is the purpose for conducting this particular stage in transport planning. Basically, modal split is considered to be as the process of separating person trips by the mode of travel. Now, normally, on a broader context, you might have observed that there will be two main categories of transport within the given region. Either it might be a public transport or it might be a private transport. Public transport is not very much concerned, is not very much taken into consideration here. But what we need to be concerned about is regarding the private transport vehicles that are available in the region. So what happens is there'll be many people who will be traveling using different modes which comes under this private transport category. You might have seen there will be cars, different dimension based cars, and capacity based cars, and there will be two wheelers. Again, in two wheelers there will be number of types into it, and so on. So it is usually expressed, this particular modal split, wherein the process of separating the person strip is done, will be expressed as a fraction, or it will be expressed in the form of a ratio, or even in terms of percentage. And basically this would be in terms of the total number of trips that are happening within the region. Okay, so the model split actually refers to the trip made by the private cars in opposition to that of the public transport, which might be a rail transport or a road transport within the given region. So basically, this particular process of model split analysis will be carried out in two different ways. One is before the trip distribution process, you can adopt this model split. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. Or the model split can be conducted after distribution process, that is trip distribution process, which we call as the post distribution model split analysis. I'll come to the discussion about all these later ahead in detail. But before we go into those details, you need to understand about the various factors which affect the model split and the model split analysis. So there are basically four such factors which are being identified as influential upon the model split analysis. The first one is the characteristics of trip, second is household characteristics, third is zonal characteristics, and then the fourth one is network characteristics. Now, when it comes to characteristics of trips, there are again sub factors which are going to influence indirectly the process of model split analysis, which comes under the characteristics of trips. So, when we talk about characteristics of trip within a given region, it might be influenced because of the trip purposes. I think we are well aware about the various trip purposes. It might be education based trip, or it might be recreation based trip, or business based trip, etc. etc. So, trip purpose is greatly influential on the model split analysis through characteristics of trip. The second factor under this is the trip length, and the uh, trip length is basically, as we have already been discussing, that the trip length might be varying from individual to individual depending upon the choice of mode of vehicle that the person chooses. And sometimes this particular trip might be represented in the form of cost, or it might be a quantitative value in terms of time, or even in terms of distance to travel from one zone to the other zone. So these are the two main factors which are influential in altering the characteristics of trip and then influencing the model split analysis to take place. The second factor is household characteristics. Under household characteristics, we have income, car ownership, family size, and composition, which includes all the characteristics that we have been studying about households. So, when it comes to income, we have been discussing how income is influential in trip generation process and trip making process. On the other hand, we have already discussed about the car ownership being influential in trip making process. Similarly, the family size and composition, which will be including the number of people residing in the house, how many of them are educated, or how many of them are earning personals, and how many are dependent people in the house, etc., etc. So these three are the factors which again influences the model split analysis. The third factor which influences the model split analysis is the zonal characteristics, which includes the concentration of the workers in different zones and also the distance from the CBD. So this particular process, that is model split analysis, apart from the concentration of worker and distance from CBD, CBD basically represents the central business district. So when it comes to a region which has to be planned, there the distance of the zone from the CBD again influences the choice of mode of transport that the people are going to select. Right. Now, apart from these two, the residential density also is one of the factor which influences the model split analysis. So, under zonal characteristics, you have residential density, concentration of the workers, and then distance from the CBD influencing the model split analysis. Now, lastly, when it comes to network characteristics, there are basically two main factors. One is the accessibility ratio, and the other one is the travel time ratio. Now, accessibility ratio is actually the measure of the relative accessibility of that particular zone to all the other zones by means of mass transit network and that of the highway network. On the other hand, travel time ratio of any given travel time by public transport and that of the travel time by the private car gives us the measure of the attractiveness or otherwise of public transport system that is existent in the region. So it's the ratio of travel time in comparison to that of the public transport with that of the private transport. Okay. Now this travel time by public transport itself has number of components into it, like time spent walking to public transport, and then time spent for waiting for the public transport, time spent in the public transport vehicle during the travel, and then time spent in transfer from one public transport to the other public transport, time spent walking from public transport vehicle to your destination, etc., etc. So these are some of the time categories that are involved when it comes to the public transport system. Okay, and then travel time by private car is basically composed of the time spent driving the car, and the time spent in parking at the destination, and the time spent in walking from the parked vehicle to your respective destination. So these are the two types of time categories which comes under public transport system and that of the private transport system. Okay. There's a third factor which comes under network characteristics, that is the travel cost ratio. Now, basically, this travel cost ratio is again the cost of travel in comparison to that of the public transport system with that of the private transport system. Now, this cost might be influential in terms of your comfort and your convenience, and also in terms of the safety which need to be considered during the travel from one place to the other place. right? So that's about the travel cost ratio. So these are the three important uh, factors which comes under network characteristics, which is influential on the model split analysis to be carried out. Now this model split in transport planning process are being categorized into two different types. One is the pre-distribution model split and the other one is the post-distribution model split. So the pre-distribution model split is the one in which the model split is considered prior to the trip distribution stage. And this process is also sometimes called as the trip and model split process. On the other hand, you have the second type of model split analysis, which is known as post-distribution model split, in which the model split will be considered after the trip distribution stage, and this particular stage can also be named as the trip interchange model split analysis. Okay, so these are the two different ways in which we can do the model split analysis, right? So uh, this let us discuss about pre-distribution model split first. Now, when it comes to pre-distribution model split, this can actually be done in two possibilities. One is at the trip distribution stage itself, and the second one is after the trip distribution stage, but before the sorry, after the trip generation stage, but before the trip distribution process. I'll repeat this once again, that the pre-distribution model split can be done through two possibilities. One is at the trip generation stage itself, and then the second possibility is after the trip generation stage but before the trip distribution stage, right? Now this particular process can be represented in the form of a flow chart like this, which can be asked in the examination. Right. Now, this pre-distribution model split analysis has its own advantages and disadvantages. I'll first explain to you about what this flowchart actually represents. So you can see here in the initial stage where the basic analysis will be carried out, you will be collecting data for public transport system characteristics and then land use characteristics, socio-economic characteristics, and then highway characteristics. And this leads to the next stage, that is the trip generation analysis, which is the first stage of doing the transport planning in the four stage travel forecasting process. And after the trip generation analysis, you will be directly moving towards model split analysis. Now this model split analysis can be for public transport, this thing transportation distribution, and the other one is the road vehicle trip distribution, right? So this is basically the private vehicle trip distribution. So between trip generation and trip distribution, you will be carrying out this model split analysis. And then accordingly, you will have the public transport traffic assignment, and then private transport traffic assignment process. So this is how the pre-distribution model split analysis will be carried out. Now talking about the advantages, the advantage of pre-distribution process is that it is less difficult and less expensive as compared to that of the post-distribution method, and the possibility of separating the public transport system and the private transport system will be offered by this particular method before you do the distribution process. It makes your work much more simple and much more easy. But on the other hand, if I want to talk about the disadvantages of pre-distribution technique, then it would be like, since you are mostly relied upon the existing and historical public transport services, it might be difficult for you to involve the planning related to the improvement in public transport system, right? It will lag you behind because you will be more relied upon and dependent upon the existing transport system, and could be difficult for you to include or predict the effects of the new transport public transport system in the area, right? So that's the reason this particular pre-distribution model split analysis is slightly unrealistic when compared to the post-distribution analysis. Alongside, it doesn't even consider the trip generation characteristics fully, and it is observed to be insensitive for future developments in the interzonal travel. That is what is the disadvantage of this pre-distribution technique. Now let's move on to the next distribution technique that we have, which is called as the post distribution model split analysis. Now this particular stage remains the same, wherein the data will be first collected and the trip analysis will be done through trip generation analysis, and then the total percent trip distribution will be carried out, and after the distribution is done you will be doing the model split analysis for zone to zone public transport percent trips, zone to zone private car percent trips, and then to develop zone to zone car occupancies, right? And then finally you would be doing the traffic assignment for both public transport and that of the private transport system. Now again, even this is having lot of advantages and disadvantages as well. Disadvantages are very less when compared to that of the pre-distribution model split analysis, and it has more of advantages. So it is basically useful in situations where a serious consideration need to be given to encourage the public transport usage, and this particular method makes it much more possible to develop model split relationship based on wide range of transport system, uh, which would be influencing the model choice. Now this model choice is uh, basically the choice of mode of transport that the people are going to make to reach their destination. Mode or modal is actually the word that represents the means through which a person is going to travel from one zone to the other zone with some purpose. Okay, so that choice of mode of transport and the later on doing the distribution process is actually going to happen in this particular stage. Okay, so the method also considers private cars as well as private vehicles and public transport usage on a zone to zone basis instead of the zonal basis itself as a pre-distribution method. Okay, so this is what you need to keep in your mind about post distribution model split analysis. Now, there are certain recent trends which are being adopted by transport planners to do the modal split analysis. Some of the popular ones are being categorized in three different forms. The first one is the probit analysis, second is the logit analysis, and then the third one is the discriminant analysis. So the probit analysis is actually based on the principle that if members of the population are subjected to stimulus that can range over an infinite scale, the frequency of the response is again stimulus and will be normally distributed. Now, this is with an assumption that the response will be considered to range between 0 to 1. On the other hand, when we talk about the modal choice, okay, the modal choice is going to again be dependent upon the probability of the trips taking place, dependent upon the choice of mode of transport that people are going to choose. Now this probit equation can be mathematically represented like this, wherein y is equal to a naught plus a1x1 plus a2x2 and so on, where this y is considered as the probit value of the probability of transit mode choice, and these x1 x2 x3 etc are the disutility variables. Okay, and corresponding to that you have these constants, additive constants and multiplicative constants, which are going to change from place to place. On the other hand, you have the logit analysis that actually assumes that the probability of the occurrence of an event varies with respect to the function f of x. This, okay, f of x, as a sigmoidal curve, and hence it is called as a logit curve, or it is also called as the logistic curve, right? Mathematically, this logit curve or logistic curve can be represented by this equation, that is p1 is equal to 1 by 1 plus e raised to gx, right? So where P1 is the probability of an individual choosing mode of transport, say 1. Similarly, if you have multiple modes of transport, you will be having P1, P2, P3 and so on, which are the respective probability of an individual choosing mode 1 or mode 2 or mode 3 to do the travel from one place to the other place, right? So this is how the various uh, evolution has taken place in doing the model split analysis. So this is all about model split analysis, a brief introduction about model split analysis. There are plenty of things that can be learnt about. I think I have already prescribed you some textbooks and reference books which are more than enough for you to know more about the model split analysis and the other stages in the four stage travel forecast model. So this is the end of model split analysis.